This is an RNZ podcast.
27 minutes to 10, or as we call it around these parts, midweek Mediawatch o'clock. Joining me now from the Wellington studio is Colin Peacock. Hello, Mr. Mediawatch.
Hi there, Emil.
How you doing?
I've got wet feet.
Yeah, how is we were just talking to Vanessa in Wellington, our quiz winner tonight before, who said it had been a bit of a torrential day in capital.
Well, I was amused. You had a guy, was it Finn or Ben?
Finn, yeah.
He was from Wellington, but had been driving a high-sided van around Christchurch.
Yeah.
Well, this evening I've been driving a borrowed high-sided van around Wellington at the absolute apex of the windiness and raininess to pick up a bed and a mattress in the pouring rain from a place that was about 400 steps down to the street, as most of them are in Wellington, like the very worst possible timing. But I'm fine.
I was wondering whether you'd biked into the studio tonight, because you tend to bike from most places, don't you, Cole?
I did, but that was earlier in the day. But I will be riding home, but not a problem. I will be propelled up the hill, the substantial hill, by the southerly when it arrives. So I'll be fine. Don't worry about me.
All right.
It's good for me.
I do worry about you, Colin. No, that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear it. All right. Shall we talk a bit about the media?
Yeah.
And perhaps we'll begin with TVNZ and this mini controversy around John Campbell's latest mini documentary for TVNZ. This is about Destiny Church, Cole. Yeah,
I did call it a mini doco, but it is a substantial doco when you put it all together, but it's in 5 parts because this is the way things are done now. It's designed for the TVNZ Plus site, so cut into bits. Called Under His Command, and it got a big push last Friday on One News at 6.
A former Destiny Church member has spoken out against the church's Man Up group, which is billed as an anti-violence program. But a woman on the receiving end of domestic abuse at the hands of one of its former members says she was blamed for being beaten. Chief Correspondent John Campbell reports for this One News in-depth investigation.
I was labelled the problem. I was the one at fault for triggering the man.
How powerless did that make you feel?
F***ing worthless as.
Yeah, so that was part one of the investigation, or part of it, into Destiny Church and that Man Up anti-violence program. That was all based on the testimony of one woman who told them how she'd been victimised.
Under a protection order, she lives in hiding and would only speak with her face blurred.
Many times I went there to ask for help to leave or have him removed. Most times they were looking at me as if I was the demonic one. I was the one, I was the problem.
Yeah, so confronting stuff, and after that John Campbell appeared in the One News studio to talk about the context of it and about the wider program. But then that entire segment on One News got cut from the episode that you'll now see if you go back to TVNZ Plus and look at One News for Friday last week.
And why was that?
Yeah, well, apparently there were complaints on social media, and particularly on, I think, Reddit threads. Hayden, my colleague, he spotted one of these, sent it to me and said, what do we make of this? And it was quite odd. So there was the anonymous Destiny Church whistleblower who you heard there. One of these complainants said she was too visible, possibly identifiable during the segment. They said they were shocked by what they saw. TVNZ subsequently told the Herald that they made that edit to the One News bulletin, out of what they called an abundance of caution.
Right, an abundance of caution. Okay. So that's hard to read. Then did they slip up? Did TVNZ slip up here?
Well, I'm not really sure, because I actually saw that segment on demand before it got cut. So it must have been posted about 2 hours after the One News at 6 went out live on TVNZ1. I saw that. And then when I later found out it had been cut, I thought, well, that can't be right, because I'd seen it, went back, and sure enough, it was gone. I guess maybe they reconsidered having, and maybe that's the right thing to do to protect the identity of someone who, as you heard, there was under protection order and so on. So, and it's tricky to know when you have to negotiate with someone in that position, I guess, and they say we're going to disguise your identity. It's tricky to know exactly how much of that disguising to do, but privacy complaints have been upheld before. There was this famous case that BSA ruled a breach of privacy where a woman in Southland was doing a bit of whistleblowing, and she was identified not her face wasn't shown, but in a cutaway shot to cover the joint in an edit, they showed her hands, as people often do, and she was wearing very distinctive jewellery.
Ah, right.
Which was enough to identify her. So broadcasters really do need to be careful. I mean, they always believe that it has more impact if you can, see and hear the person on camera, a warm body, even if they are blurred, or even, that robotic voice disguise they sometimes deploy. I mean, if you think back, John Campbell himself ended up in hot water years and years ago on TV3. They had the man who'd stolen the
medals,
the medals,
right.
And they deployed an actor to make it like that, more engaging. So if you're going to be, if there's a real danger of identification, you just don't show the individual, but you can show statements and type up text and put it on screen. But that obviously isn't very, kinetic and engaging. But TVNZ said in the end, the 5-part series that went up on TVNZ Plus is unchanged. So they must have looked at it and considered actually it was okay what they'd done. And I do have to say that having seen it, in the original version that went out on the One News, those cuts there didn't seem to me to be, nothing leapt out at me to think, oh my goodness, they haven't done enough to disguise the identity of that person.
I did see some comments from a cameraman a very experienced cameraman who I worked with way back in the day, who was very surprised that essentially what he described as an unblurred, well, I mean, it wasn't. Well, actually, was it unblurred? It was more a silhouette thing, right?
Yeah, that's right. Silhouette, you could see sort of hair and the outline of ears. You could get a rough idea of what the person looked like. I mean, don't mean to be sort of crass about this, but there was, I think, an Australian show host guy called, I think, Clive Robertson, years and years ago, and he used to have a segment where he would actually read the news, like a news update during a show, and they carry on because it was a live entertainment show. And he once read a bit where they had pixelated footage of someone being arrested and led away handcuffed at a car, and they pixelated the faces. And when he came back into vision, he said, I don't know if you know this, but if you just squint, you can usually make out who it is. Can we run that again, boys? And they ran the footage again, and when he came back into vision, he was squinting into the camera saying, yeah, I reckon I know who that is. But sorry, I'm making light of it. No, but I mean, what I saw, I didn't feel, that was edited out of One News, I did not feel was unsurprising. Nothing that made me leap up and think, oh my goodness, they've shown too much of that person. But it could be there was other footage seen by other people that did raise the alarm and prompted TVNZ to, as they said, exercise more caution.
You're quite a gifted impressionist, Cole. You know that?
Oh, I don't know. That was just a man with an Australian accent. I was just trying to bring it alive.
It made me think of your impression of Boris Johnson a couple of months ago, which was also magnificent.
What?
Oh yeah, you don't remember this?
No. What reason would I have to?
No, it made our promo.
Oh goodness, Boris Johnson.
Exactly
I don't even remember talking about him.
No, there's definitely a Boris Johnson impression that you did. I'll dig it up from the archives.
Could be thinking of someone else.
I don't think so. Right. Returning to the topic of our discussion, though, and the investigation itself. This is not the first time that John Campbell has investigated Destiny, is it? What was different about this?
Yeah, back in the TV3 Campbell Live days. And Campbell actually gave an interview with TVNZ, part of the promotion of this new series for the TVNZ site, where he said that was more about the business that was being built around what he described as the low-income congregation. But he says people have pointed that out. That's not actually unique to Destiny. And I can remember Campbell Live bits with a hidden or covert camera showing people throwing $20 and $50 notes onto the stage and things like that, that people who look like they would be able to afford that. But he says, John Campbell, in February, a couple of people had come to him and said, we're dealing with a lot of Destiny Church people now. Some of them are in a really bad way. And his main focus in that early part is the Man Up program, because that's been used, I think, by the justice system in the past for rehab and reform of people in cases of domestic violence. And it's all underwritten by, or at least in part, by the charitable status of Destiny, which is currently under review. That's the focus of the second and the third part of this 5-part series. Part 2 is called Stuff Your Charity, which is something Brian Tamaki has actually said when hitting back at critics of its charitable status. And the part 3 is called Protection of the Tithe. And actually in, I think, the second part, quite an interesting interview with a guy from the Internal Affairs Department.
Are you currently investigating Destiny Church?
I think it's well established. Yes, we are investigating Destiny. I'm not in a position to comment about the specifics of that. The matter's under active investigation. As I'm sure you can appreciate, a matter that we are currently investigating, I'm not in a position to talk about.
We are less constrained. In part 2 of this series, we examine Destiny Church's charity status, the law and minister under which charities exist, and Charity Services itself, who oversee that law for all 29,000 charities.
Yeah.
29,000 charities.
I know, isn't that so many? I mean, if you'd asked me to guess, I would have guessed, I don't know, 7 or 8 or something like that. But what John Campbell showed there was it's quite unusual for charities to be deregistered, even though there's so many of them, and some of them must be small concerns if there were that many. But he showed how there's quite a difficult segment where he's got to do a lot of talking to camera. There's a lot of text on screen, but there's almost no other way to do it, showing how many Destiny Church-related charities have gone on and off the register over the years, often some of them not filing accounts or paperwork, or at least not enough of it. He reckoned in the bit that's now missing from the One News interview that was last Friday, I think, he said he reckoned this review of Destiny's charities could be done within 4 to 6 weeks, which is interesting because that's not a detail I think that's been reported elsewhere. But as you heard, the guy from the Internal Affairs was very tight-lipped about that. You wouldn't expect them to say a whole lot about it until they're ready to, I guess. But it was interesting about, as he was pointing out, John Campbell, that Brian Tamaki's been very belligerent about this when criticised about the charitable status, often saying, we don't need it. And as John Campbell has himself demonstrated, they're perfectly able to get money from their followers, it seems, with tithing and donations and so on anyhow. And that's part of his boast, that he could actually go and not have to have that oversight for how they're spending their money.
An interesting thing about this series, 5-part series, but it's only on TVNZ Plus, not on terrestrial TV. Yep,
that's the way they're doing things now. Factual programs, domestic documentaries don't really seem to have much of a place. But that's the reason why TVNZ said we are going to open up that TVNZ Plus site or service and kind of make it a portal for shorter news videos. So that's why it's carved up into 5. It could easily be amalgamated into a 45 or 1 hour for telly with ad breaks in it. The final episode is quite interesting, where John Campbell thinks he's got, I don't want to spoil it, but thinks he's got an appointment to go to Destiny Church HQ and speak to them about these issues. Turns out to be a bit more complicated than that, but the encounter is very interesting. But it seems just not room for any kind of substantial factual shows on our main channels anymore, but plenty of room for just about anything from the UK with, they call them factual shows, but you can see, Alan Carr buying houses in Spain, and pretty much the entire cast of, what's that thing called, the game show with Rose Matafeo on it that occasionally throws
Taskmaster.
Taskmaster, yeah. Just about anyone who's in that gets a spin-off where it'll end up on TV1, so plenty of room for that sort of stuff.
You sound like you're bemoaning me, Cole.
I wonder about the appetite for these, these jobbing British comedians, and Joe Lycett and people like that, who aren't huge figures here, I would have thought, but everything they do on telly seems to find a home on TVNZ Plus, but John Campbell's documentary, not so much.
Well, last week on Midweek Mediawatch, I talked to Hayden about how the news of Pope Francis' death broke. And was broken by news organisations. And since then, the funeral has taken place, an epic funeral, and has been a big media event.
Yeah, because you spoke a bit about this with Hayden about the breaking of the news, and this interesting thing, the news organisations here regard it as kind of obviously a global event, but is it a special interest thing? Because not everyone's interested in the Catholic Church and so on. But there's plenty of international coverage of this, of course, that you can dip in and out of. So do local news organisations push the boat out as much as they're able to, or not? But in the end, something I hadn't quite factored in with my ignorance was, how he was a more interesting character than I'd realised. That perhaps, unlike the passing of previous popes like Benedict not so long ago, I think he actually stepped down, didn't he, before he was too old or unwell to do the job, if I've got that right. But, the fact of him being a reformer and, the perhaps a bit of a schism within the church about the reform and the social aspect and campaigning that he did, and the traditions of the church, kind of interesting. But, also other things like, football podcasts being done on, the footballing influence of the Pope,
Yeah.
I think this seems like overkill. And yet matches in Italy, top-level matches, were called off, in Milan and so on.
He was a big football fan, I think. He supported San Lorenzo, beloved club of football manager computer game players around the world.
Okay. Yeah, so there's angles I hadn't thought of that possibly, gave it a bit more oomph.
Also, all of the world leaders were there, and there is Trump and Zelensky, of course, had a meeting which gave rise to an iconic photograph, and which would have given it greater news value. Do you think? Yeah,
and if there is a peace settlement, that picture will be endlessly reprinted. Interesting piece by a guy called Tim Stanley, ran a lot of the NZME papers and on the Herald site because it came from the UK's Sunday Telegraph that they're hooked into. He said, I've been to several funerals that threatened to break into a fist fight. This one threatened to turn into a peace conference. He said this was the most political papal funeral in living memory, and it's just what he would have wanted, said Tim Stanley, which is something you normally don't do when someone died. From beyond the grave, the wily Argentine conspired to try and bring peace a little closer in Ukraine. So I don't know about that, but he also went into how, what's to come, about some hoping the next pope might be Italian. But he even said the service seemed designed by his supporters to establish his personality as a standard by which his successor would be judged. So interesting stuff. I saw the Herald on Sunday had a almost souvenir-style cover.
Huge
calling
cover,
him
wasn't it?
the People's Pope, which sort of echoed the Princess Diana, People's Princess thing. TVNZ, they went really big, lots of coverage, first 20 minutes of a couple of bulletins, 2 correspondents in Rome, Kate Nicol-Williams, as well as the Europe correspondent May Heron. So they obviously decided it was something to go big on and did a good job.
Prime Minister was there as well, and where he goes, the media goes.
Yeah, that would definitely be part of it. There was also a sort of unexpected thing, which you wouldn't have got from any other international coverage, was a bearded Michael Wood, former Labour Minister, E2 union spokesperson these days, just popped up in the crowd. He seemed a little startled to be picked out, possibly a little tired and sweaty. He said he was on some sort of pilgrimage, although I think he said he wasn't a Catholic, which is kind of confusing. But also unique Kiwi content. May Heron did find this one random Kiwi for a soundbite.
Certainly does feel like you've been part of history today, hey?
Yeah, 100%. I think being here for the weekend, if I didn't pop in, my mum would never have forgiven me.
There you go.
Well, they must have been really chuffed to get that on telly. Mum wouldn't have forgiven me for not popping in to the Pope's funeral.
For not popping in, exactly. Well, now that Pope Francis has been laid to rest, there is, of course, the matter of the succession, the next Pope.
Yep. And that's the focus of the coverage from now on, I guess. And this certainly excited News Talk ZB. They were going to a freelance journalist from Australia called Joe McKenna, who was set up in Rome. And I've just picked out this one clip because maybe I'm overthinking it here, but she made it sound like almost sort of New Zealand coalition politics.
So these Conservatives are pushing back big time, and there is a lot of toing and froing going on behind the scenes right now. The other thing that's interesting, I ran into a Vatican insider last night who had a senior position no longer, and he told me off the record the Italians want to see a European Pope, they want to see an Italian Pope, and even though the Italians don't have a huge number in terms of the total electors, there are only about 16 Italians, he said they have enormous influence. They see it as a family business.
A family business?
Yeah, I know. With you talking about Italy and
what
family businesses, that does bring to mind other sorts of enterprises. But, all these sort of former Vatican insiders roaming around giving people opinions, it just sounded like politics rather than, a somber religious affair.
Which, of course, makes the timing of the movie Conclave quite interesting.
Yeah, I think you talked a little bit about that last week as well.
Yeah.
But for that reason, I thought you might enjoy cut a little clip here. This is made the news on ZB last Monday. This is 10 in the morning. And the newsreader, none other than our former colleague, Max Toll.
New Zealand's Cardinal John Dew is at the Vatican for the conclave. He told Newstalk ZB the blockbuster movie is somewhat representative of the process.
I enjoyed the film. It gave people, I think, a very good idea of what does happen.
Yeah, and there's a piece up on RNZ's life section today about how close is it to reality. But with me, because you hosted the World Cup podcast,
Squeaky Bum Time.
Yeah, Squeaky Bum Time.
That was one of my first ventures into broadcasting, sort of longer form broadcasting. Max and I hosting the 2018 World Cup podcast, Squeaky Bum Time.
Could you not then revive that for the conclave? Is there time? Is it Squeaky Conclave time? Something like that?
Oh dear.
Are we now not treating this occasion with the gravitas that it should be?
Let's park that thought for the time being, Cole. We'll return to it another time, perhaps.
Let's do that.
Maybe let's talk a bit about the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Trump was, of course, at the Pope's funeral, so not at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, but that's not uncommon. Yeah,
I think so. But there have been some signature moments, the Barack Obama mic drop and so on, and some great comedy and clips to come out of them. This one is a bit weird, like the White House Correspondents Association ahead of it dropped a comedian because they thought it might be too divisive. Politico, reflecting on the event, said the press somber and tentative after President Donald Trump and his administration pulled access, sued outlets over coverage, has ditched the comedian for the dinner and what has been billed as a celebration of independence. Said Trump supporters, says Politico, have relished what they call the snub of the mainstream media and an opportunity for Trump to brandish his populist credentials because, he was in attendance at a funeral of a renowned religious leader, so he comes out with the moral high ground, something like that. So basically not the occasion where the press gets to parade itself as it has become used to being able to do.
So it's just a bunch of journalists sitting around eating dinner together and sniping at one another then?
Yeah, and talking about the First Amendment and all that stuff that it's
course,
really supposed to be upholding. They do give out awards for themselves as well, and it was interesting. A lot of awards went to, news outlets that a lot of people wouldn't know the names of, or certainly wouldn't have known them a few years ago. For example, Alex Thompson of Axios won the Aldo Beckman Award, which I hadn't heard of before. But this was interesting. It was for his coverage of the cover-up of Biden, the decline of Joe Biden while he was still in office. This has been the subject of criticism for the media that they were, going soft on this, unwilling to address it. And interesting quote here from Thompson. He said, "We, myself included, missed a lot of the story. Some people trust us less now because of this. We bear some of the responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows." So that's kind of really beating yourself up. But not a whole lot of prizes won at the awards by the established big outlets, like New York Times and Washington Post and so on. A lot of them being picked up, interestingly, by news agencies, AP, Reuters and that, who are perhaps becoming more important in the news mix than they used to be.
And the New Zealand media entrepreneur Hamish McKenzie, the co-founder of Substack, had something to say about this, Colin. Yeah,
interesting, partly because of the timing, because he said, look, we are hosting a party of our own at the same time as the Correspondents' Dinner, so maybe joining in that you're not the only game in town thing vibe that was caused by the president not being there. But he said hundreds of people will be at our do, independent journalists, political figures from all sorts of backgrounds. And this is a time of profound transition in the media. He said a new media order is emerging. Journalism is not dead, said Hamish McKenzie. It's on Substack.
It's on Substack. There's a line. I mean, what do you make of that claim? Bold, but too bold?
Well, he's got a point because, in a fairly short time, a lot of people, journalists from legacy media, have been able to find a living and a place to publish.
A good living in some cases.
In some cases. And in some cases, Substack has supported them, so have an editorial function there.
Yeah.
And they've had controversy too, because they've had some fairly fringe opinions that haven't always gone down well, particularly with progressive people. But he's saying, look, this is the strength of it. But then he sort of overcooks it a little, I think, with some of his rhetoric. He says, this is quoting from his bulletin, this contest of ideas, the dialogue, the disagreement, the dissent, it's what made America great, and it's what makes Substack great too. We take pride in this discourse. It unleashes expression. We don't suppress it. It demands substance where success is built not on momentary clicks, but on a deeper connection. The people who join us on Saturday night, not at the Correspondents' Dinner, they are pioneers of this new world order, refusing to bend to the cynicism about current media and show the way to something better. So, yeah, pretty high-flown stuff.
Yeah, and I mean Substack's business model is, readers pay to subscribe to individual writers that they follow, and Hamish's thoughts were similar to those of a great tōtara of New Zealand journalism expressed this week.
Yeah, Patrick Smelly, founder of Business Desk and a long-serving journalist and mover and shaker in politics and other areas. He has pointed this out too. He wrote what he kind of almost apologetically called another reflection on where the media is going. And he said, look, these are difficult times, but he said news loves trouble. People will pay for news in times of trouble. There'll be lots of reckons, lots of flame wars and blogs, and people will read it and be interested. Some will even believe it, but people aren't stupid, he said. People make judgments, they sift, they form their own views, and now is a time when people will be prepared to pay for news, that matters that they can rely on. He said those who can afford to will seek out trusted sources, and the media that thrive will fill that void, as with a future as businesses. He said they'll be smaller, driven by editorial concerns rather than advertising imperatives. Today's news platforms, news publishers, he said, both in Australia and New Zealand, have in practice now become real estate advertising platforms with newsrooms attached.
Oh man, that's scolding stuff. We have about a minute left, Carl, but what do you make of that? I mean, I can see the benefits of a subscription first model. The drawbacks, of course, being it's difficult to grow at scale like it might be easier to through advertising.
Yeah, in Substack it's individuals, like it's a lot of commentary, a lot of analysis as well as journalism, but there's no chief reporter assigning coverage, no one telling people to cover something they perhaps don't want to do and become really good at. So it's not journalism in that sense such as you get from a big organisation. But that thing about property platforms with journalism attached, in Australia, the Nine network, its most profitable element ended up being this thing called Domain, which is all about real estate. A bid currently for that, $2.8 billion from US digital real estate listings giant, the CoStar Group, which is kind of funny because here at RNZ, the kind of creaking audio platform that RNZ now owns because it's kind of obsolete and we acquired it and it's done a great dash. That's called CoStar, so kind of funny to see that being in a position to bid $2.8 billion for real estate listings in Australia.
I had to admit I did a bit of a double take at this one. Colin Peacock, nice chatting. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. See you in a couple of weeks.
That is Colin Peacock.